Now, the Madlanga Commission in Pretoria has heard how more than 20 bags containing narcotics allegedly fell from a container when it was opened by law enforcement officials. And this emerged during testimony by Gauteng Hawks Unit Commander Colonel Francois Steyn. And he told the Commission that despite claims made by police officers who were at the scene, no photographic evidence was produced. Steyn is testifying, or was rather yesterday testifying about the 2021 theft of narcotics in Aeroton, south of Johannesburg. He says that photographs should have been taken before the container was opened. Now let's dissect some of this, of what Colonel Steyn had to say and his testimony with crime expert Chad Thomas. Chad, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much and good morning to everybody.
Chad, firstly, if we could just start in terms of what this tells us, yesterday's evidence and, of course, last week's evidence about what had happened in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly at that Port Shepstone theft of narcotics. What does this tell us about infiltration of the criminal underworld into the South African Police Service?
It's a very perturbing and concerning situation. One must understand that the international trafficking in narcotics is one of the biggest organized crimes in the world. And South Africa has emerged as one of the key destinations for the transshipment of narcotics. So we get narcotics from South America, we get narcotics from Asia, it gets repackaged in South Africa and then sent off to other foreign destinations, including Australia, which is one of the most highly valued countries in respect of the sale of cocaine. It's sold at one of the highest values there. And South Africa has emerged as one of the key ports of export in respect of cocaine to Australia, as well as methamphetamine and heroin. Now, if we've got such a massive drug problem and we've established a unit like SANUP, the South African Narcotics Enforcement Bureau, within the Hawks, we need to ensure that they're properly capacitated. They have the proper storage facilities, the proper teams on hand to be able to bag the exhibits, photograph the exhibits, secure the exhibits, ensure the chain of custody is in place. That's obviously not happening. And this concerns one because when one looks at America in the 70s and the 80s, when drugs became a massive problem there, the president at the time, Reagan, took the people into his confidence, the citizenry of the land. He used to have these fireside chats about the emergence of narcotics being a massive problem, involved in narco trafficking, terror trafficking, etc. And of course, the DEA was established as a standalone agency, the Drug Enforcement Agency. We need something similar, because the spin-off of narcotics in South Africa and the illicit transshipment thereof has led to gang wars, turf wars, and an emergence of multiple international syndicates operating on our soil.
And of course, we heard of this anecdotally, but now we are seeing, some of the empirical evidence about how even at the very basic level, the rules are being transgressed by police officers. And unsurprisingly, these narcotics just disappear.
It's an unbelievable situation that the chain of evidence, the chain of custody isn't maintained in such a manner and fashion. We're talking about professional police officers who have been in the police service for a very, very long time. And the various protocols are laid out in standing orders and directives, and they are not being followed correctly. We saw what happened in Port Shepstone. We heard what happened when Francois Steyn took the stand yesterday, and he spoke about the Aeroton bust. There's just no control. You're seeing how the drugs are being loaded. You're seeing how the drugs are being packaged. You're then hearing how they've been tested, taken out of their initial packaging, poured like powder into other evidence bags. It doesn't sound professional. When one looks at how the DEA and other agencies around the world handle this, one has to understand that our South African Narcotics Enforcement Bureau do not have sufficient capacity and resources, much the same as other important units within the South African Police Service, as well as within the Hawks. And this, like I mentioned, is a massive concern, considering that South Africa, from its geographical perspective, has emerged as one of the primary drug transshipment points in the world. And although we're working with our international partners, I mentioned Australia earlier, Australian Federal Police have worked very closely with SANUP, as has Interpol, as has other jurisdictions. It doesn't come close to the amount of drugs being bust that are arriving on our shores been repackaged. Something serious has to be done. And again, like I mentioned at the outset of the insert, you've got all, there's the turf wars, there's the murder for hire, and of course, there's the control of these international markets.
And let's call a spade here, Chad, because what we are listening to at the Madlanga Commission is, of course, evidence from reports that we have seen in the media about what had happened at Port Shepstone. And even at the time, the seeming, deduction from that was that this was an inside job. But then you look at, the chain of events as they unfold, where those drugs were not taken to the nearest facility that could house them, but they were taken to a facility 100 kilometers away, a facility that did not have the requisite security detail to house it. And when ultimately these drugs go missing, you have the person who had the keys to the strong room not being subjected to a lie detector test, even though he played an integral part, did General Senona, in those drugs being transported to Port Shepstone as opposed to Durban Central or any other station that was closest to the station there where the drugs initially were reported.
Unfortunately, that's a microcosm of what's happening throughout the South African Police Service and the Hawks in South Africa. We've heard of break-ins at multiple facilities. And that particular facility in Port Shepstone had 7 previous break-ins. They even had a private security company on standby as a reaction. And that contract had been cancelled, that can't respond. So it's a comedy of errors. And one must ask oneself, is it a deliberate comedy of errors, or is it just because there's no capacity, there's no resource, there's no experience? I think it's a mixture of both. We know the value of these narcotics now runs into the billions of rands if one looks at the raids that have taken place over the last couple of years. Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg. We could say maybe 10% or less is being intercepted. So we are talking about a multi-billion rand industry. So when these drugs go missing, a kilogram of cocaine worth 400,000 rand before it's cut on the black market can be sold for 100,000 rand if you've got enough of it. It's very easy to compromise police officers. It's very easy for those crime syndicates to ensure that they've infiltrated the police from the bottom to the very top so that they can get those drugs back and get those drugs repackaged and shipped to their ultimate destinations.
And if we listen to what happened in the Aeroton bust, where the commander of the Boysens police station did not want to be responsible for keeping that haul. And what should we read into that? Because clearly there's something wrong there. Chad?
It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. I can actually understand where that police officer was coming from. You have a shipment, such a massive shipment worth hundreds of millions of rands. It's not far-fetched to imagine an attack on a police station. We have had attacks on police stations to steal firearms. We've had attacks on army bases to steal firearms and grenade launchers. When you're talking about hundreds of millions of rands worth of drugs being stored in an SAP-13 exhibit room, you can understand the concern from that particular station commander, because he thought to himself, is it worth the risk of my members? And that's why I said we have to have the right facilities, we have to have the right capacity, we have to have the right resources. And that's why they should look at establishing a standalone drug enforcement type agency in South Africa with a drug czar, much the same as we saw Reagan do in the 80s when they had the crack pandemic in America. And it seemed to work for a while, that particular war on drugs. Because in South Africa, when you have a war on drugs, you're not just fighting the drug lords, you're fighting all the periphery crimes that are taking place. The murder for hire, the kidnap for ransom, the petty theft taking place by the actual users on the street. But most importantly, you're infiltrating, disrupting, and dismantling international syndicates that are making South Africa the laughing stock of the world because they've established themselves here without fear or favor, so much, in fact, that Mexicans have been arrested on South African soil, linked to the Sinaloa cartel, cooking meth that can be exported from South Africa.
Indeed, Chad Thomas, and hopefully some of these lessons will be learned and some of the suggestions will be taken forward. Chad Thomas is a crime expert dissecting some of the evidence that we've heard last week and yesterday from the Madlanga Commission, where Colonel Francois Steyn testified yesterday about that drug bust in Aeroton, south of Johannesburg. And it's a serious, serious matter, as Chad points out. The country, ordinary South Africans know exactly what the impact of these drugs are on our communities, on our family units, and something needs to be done.